Member for Little Bow.
That's close enough, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to rise and speak to Bill 17, the Appropriation Act. This is a bill that I won't be able to support, Mr. Speaker. Bill 17 is going to create substantial financial hardships for the people of the province of Alberta. There is a tremendous amount of spending to take place, and there is a tremendous amount of money that has to be borrowed in order to see that spending. So what the Appropriations Act defines is a $10.4 billion deficit for the fiscal year 2016-17. Debts and deficits become somewhat confusing to the average Albertan that doesn't sit in this House or doesn't sit around discussing the budget at length. They're so unlucky to be unable to do that. So to help those folks that listen sometimes and some that watch now on occasion, Webster's defines a deficit as an excessive expenditure or liabilities over income or assets in a given period. Debt is something different. Benjamin Franklin said that when you run in debt, you give to another power over your liberty. Webster says that debt is simply defined as a state of owing money. Well, we will certainly owe money as a province, Mr. Speaker, more money than ever before. As a matter of fact, we'll be borrowing to keep the operations of the government in a state of continuance. In other words, borrowing to keep the lights on. Borrowing money for operations and capital expenditures is one thing. Removing the self-imposed debt ceiling so that unrestrained borrowing is available to those that make those decisions is something else entirely. The government intends to borrow billions of dollars, which will be used to fund its operations and will exceed its own legislated debt ceiling in just 3 years. Total debt is projected to hit a very large number, a number never seen in Alberta, $57.6 billion by 2019. Also, the government is completely drawing down the contingency account and borrowing $5.4 billion to cover operating costs this year. The government last borrowed to finance daily operations in 1994. The deficit, meanwhile, is forecast at a rather large number as well within this budget. Remember, a deficit is an excess of expenditure over income. In this fiscal year of 2016-17, there will be a record deficit of $10.4 billion. Those are staggering numbers. We've seen within this short amount of time since the newest NDP budget's been presented, several bond rating agencies downgrade Alberta's credit rating. Now, this is not good. Alberta's finance minister flew to Toronto and New York to sell the so-called jobs creation budget in an effort to have bond rating agencies quit lowering our credit rating. But those agencies, to be perfectly honest, Mr. Speaker, are not interested in whether or not this budget protects Alberta's core services or creates jobs. What bond rating agencies like DBRS or Moody's or Standard & Poor are interested in is whether or not Alberta's finances are creditworthy, whether or not this government has the intention to show the ability that the province has to pay back the money that it borrows. There is increased risk for bond agencies to lend money to this province. The projected profound deficits are one part of the risk. $10.6 billion is stated before in this year, $10.1 billion in 2017-2018, and $8.4 billion in the 18-19 fiscal year. The amount of debt is another $57.6 billion within the next 3 years. And the rather prolonged amount of time between now and when the budget will supposedly be balanced in 2024. All of these things reflect the downgrades that we've seen so far, the latest just 5 days ago. The fact that the province of Alberta has given no indication of how or when it will start to pay back the debt that it has accumulated or will have accumulated is another reason that bond rating agencies get spooked. So until we are shown, or until debt rating agencies are shown, a plan to tackle the principle, Alberta is going to pay a higher rate of interest on the money borrowed. The cost to pay just the interest will be upwards of $2 billion per year. That's just the interest, not principal. The largest expense in government after health, education, and social services will be the money that Alberta is going to have to pay just on interest on the money borrowed. Less money for schools, less money for teachers, less money for frontline staff. The Wild Rose Caucus did come out with a solid, realistic plan to reduce annual spending by $2 billion. That information is all very public, Mr. Speaker. There are always ways to achieve modest spending reductions in this budget, but it means making a choice. And in the Appropriation Act 2016, Albertans will be taxed like they've never been taxed before. Many of my colleagues have spoken about the impact that the newly proposed carbon tax will, when it is implemented starting in January 1 of 2017, will see the tax Albertan has to pay, along with an increase on that tax on January 1 of 2018. Now, I will give one shot in the arm to the government that came up with the newest budget. I'm going to say that I think every opposition party in the House probably will claim that lowering the small business tax was their idea. I don't know anything about what the other opposition parties did or didn't say about the small business tax, but I do know for a fact that the Wild Rose did suggest that lowering that particular tax was important, and we're glad to see that the NDP got that job done, lowering the small business tax from 3% to 2%. But back to the carbon tax, this proposed tax is just another massive overhead fee for actual job creators. With increased overhead fees, the amount that businesses will be able to set aside for labor will become less and less. The price of fuel, whether fuel for heating buildings or fuel for delivering goods, will increase the cost of those goods to all Albertans. And every Albertan in their own circumstance will see the same additional costs as a result of the carbon tax. In Alberta, we have winter. Now, you can wear 3 sets of long underwear and 3 sweaters for 5 months of the year if you like, but you still have to keep your home warm enough to function in while you're in it. This tax means that keeping your home at a reasonable temperature while you're in it is going to cost more. Now, you could turn the temperature in your house down when you take your kids to the rink for hockey practice, but just a minute. The price of fuel for your car is going to cost more. 4.5 cents per litre at the pump for gasoline and 5.4 cents at the pump for diesel. Those prices will go up by 50% more on January 1 of 2018. This tax will touch just about everything that an Albertan has to use his after-tax dollars for to purchase. And what about the cost of the companies that build the infrastructure in Alberta? The companies that build our schools and our hospitals and improve our roads. There's been no exemption to those folks. The increased cost of operation for construction companies will have to be passed on to the government, which will in turn be passed on to each of us. And what about the cost of keeping the lights on in a hospital or heating that hospital, or the cost of running an ambulance? These are not hypothetical scenarios. There are actually real numbers attached here. I want to quote from a recent media article, Metro News on May 11th, which reads, quote, "If the government's carbon tax was in place, Alberta Health Services would have spent about 38% more on natural gas to power its facilities during the 15-16 fiscal year." It goes on to say that AHS said it spent more than $17.7 million on natural gas, with more than 4,372,264 gigajoules combined by all of its facilities during its 2015-16 fiscal year. The government's carbon tax will charge an extra little more than $1.51, just about $1.52 per gigajoule, meaning that AHS would have spent more than $24.3 million on natural gas, a spike of about $6 million. End quote. The costs of heating schools and government buildings, the increased costs of busing children back and forth to school, the increased costs of public transit that Albertans that use it will be forced to pay for, those costs are all passed on to Albertans. According to Edmonton Public Schools, heating public schools will cost an estimated $630,000 more for the 8 months that the carbon tax would apply. Now, unless they plan on exempting school boards, that's money allegedly earmarked for education that is being diverted back to the government as a carbon tax. When you get down to it, it becomes clear that you get a lot less out of this budget than you're paying for. Mr. Speaker, the facts speak for themselves. This budget proposes a significant uptake in debt for Alberta. Debts and deficits like those proposed here will result in incredibly difficult decisions in the future. And for all the problems that will be caused by this headfirst dive into debt, perhaps one of the most significant problems is that the government will have so little to show for it when it comes to results. Albertans will pay the price for decisions made in this provincial budget for years, perhaps generations to come. With that, Mr. Speaker, I don't intend to support this bill, but thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.